Skyboxes. Such a straightforward thing, but one you've probably never given a second thought. Essentially, all they are is the cube or sphere placed around a level that gets painted with a backdrop that you will see as the player. Without it, your typical Source Engine game will look something like this. The thought that sparked this video came to me while I was staring off into the distance during a match of Marathon, where it hit me just how liminal a skybox feels when you give it attention. The Webster definition of the word liminal is of, relating to, or situated at a sensory threshold, barely perceptible or capable of eliciting a response. And second, of, relating to, or being an intermediate state, phase, or condition. I apologize for turning this into yet another YouTube video essay on liminal spaces, but I promise we're going to connect it back. By this point, the term has been twisted and molded into a word synonymous with any creepy or abandoned place. But what makes these pictures real liminal spaces is that they showcase places of transition. It can be in the literal sense, such as hallways, corridors, roads, things you pass through that you never stop to give a thought about, or places that you expect to be full of life but have transitioned to an uncharacteristic emptiness, like malls, atriums, and parking lots, places where you're used to seeing hustle and bustle. A great example I think everyone has experienced is when you were a kid and you had to go back to school for a concert or night event, and you looked into the empty classrooms and halls and had that undescribable feeling of unease because you're not used to seeing it in this light. Skyboxes in games occupy an in-between intermediate place in the world's geometry. It isn't part of the interactiveness of the level itself per se, at least typically, and because it literally is a background entity, you aren't always going to be directly exposed to it. But it is always present, at least partially in your peripheral vision when you're not inside. Like the first definition says, it's situated at a sensory threshold. Even in cases where you may not notice it or give it full attention, it is subconsciously affecting the mood, scale, and feelings you have as a player navigating that space. The first example I want to use is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. Being a Star Wars game, and just one of the best games ever made, but that's for another time, you find yourself traveling across the galaxy to many different varied worlds. The first place you find yourself in is the Sith-occupied planet of Terrace, which is, if I can say this word correctly, an ecumenopolis, a planet whose surface is made up of one single massive city. KOTOR, since it's an RPG from 2003, is fairly contained by modern standards. The planets are smaller, explorable hub zones, more akin to something like The Witcher 2 instead of the expanse of The Witcher 3. And just take in this atmosphere. Strictly functionally, this zone is nothing but a long corridor to introduce you to the world and give you a few small tutorial encounters on your way to start the real quest, and nothing more. 95% of players are going to run straight through. So if we take a second to pause in this liminal space, what do we see? Well, for starters, an immense sense of scale and placement. The entire time we're on this planet, it's set on just one of these spires. It isn't until you look out that you realize it's just but one of a countless number covering the surface of the planet, and despite the importance of your mission, you're really but an ant compared to the size of the world you're on. Combining these visuals with the ambient music creates a beautifully serene, melancholic feeling. And had you never paid this close attention to the backdrop, you probably still felt these feelings but didn't have an explanation for it. Well, you can thank the old cube in the sky. Something else I find interesting with these older games is how the technological limitations play a role in the evoked feelings. Despite everything I've said so far about KOTOR, at the end of the day, the skyboxes are just static JPEG images being projected onto the big cube. I want to compare this to another modern game I played recently, Kingdom Come Deliverance. This is an open-world historical RPG that lets you explore a big landmass in medieval Bohemia. The skybox in this game is a gorgeous, dynamic art piece with moving clouds, weather rolling in and out, and allegedly an exact recreation of the night sky from the era, complete with the constellation mappings that would have been visible. So yeah, it's come a long way from static imagery. The technology behind it is objectively better and makes pretty much anything possible now. So why does it feel so different? Being a historical game and not a fantastical one, it perfectly serves its mission in providing a real-life, dynamic backdrop to the world you're in. But that's the thing, it isn't really a backdrop. Because it's a full open world, I'll let Todd Howard explain what happens when you see something in the distance.
If you've played our previous stuff, you know that mountain is not just a backdrop. You can walk all the way to the top of that mountain.
You dork. Go back to the chess club. Who's laughing now?
The sense of wonder and exploration is still there, but it presents differently because you actually get to do it yourself. There's absolutely extremely beautiful skyboxes in open world games. The Aurora in Skyrim is one that comes to mind right away. But since the theme of this video is feeling, why is it that the less advanced ones are the ones that stick out in my memory more? In this example, when you have the thought about what lies beyond, you can just go get an answer. In KOTOR, you can't walk into the background image, so you're left with only what your imagination can conjure up. When you make it to Tatooine and step into the Dune Sea, this is what it looks like. It's extremely low tech, but it sells the vast expanse of sand. The way the landmass fades out into the mountains of the skybox gives the illusion that you could just walk out endlessly like it was KCD or Skyrim. But once again, the limitations mean you can only imagine. Another example of this I love is from Vampire: The Masquerade Bloodlines. It nails the feeling of running around a dark, gothic version of Hollywood like no other game recreates. And once again, if you stop and take it in, it's apparent why. The over-the-top darkness draws more attention to the skybox here, giving the streets an oppressive and scary feeling. Especially when you find a spot where you can see the rest of the unreachable skyscrapers peeking through. When you add in the city ambiance, it creates a sense of placement in this familiar but somewhat off-kilter world that we know.
What's the hops, bro?
Sometimes, in the case of a Half-Life 2, it can be used in a direct storytelling way. Your eyes are meant to focus on the Citadel, the main outpost of the villains, the second you step foot outside for the first time. It's mostly static, but you can see drones floating in and out, which is a crazy detail for a game from 2004. But the main thing is as you progress through the levels of the story, the Citadel is always present and looming, getting larger and larger in each skybox. It's such a simple trick, but once again, it completely nails the sense of where you're placed in this fictional world and the size of the threat you're up against without ever needing to say anything directly to the player. Another example, one that's now been beaten to death for good reason, is Halo. Of course, the imagery is now iconic, but can you imagine what it was like to see this for the first time? The opening mission is set aboard an enclosed spaceship where you're given the tutorial and story setup, which is fairly straightforward by science fiction standards. But if you look out the window in the Pillar of Autumn, you can glimpse the Halo ring from a distance, establishing the strange world you're about to touch down on. When you do finally crash, this is the sight that you're greeted with. All of a sudden, the scale of what you've found is made clear. The levels you proceed to fight through are just one segment of this absolutely massive alien structure. You also get to watch the occasional Covenant ship fly in from the sky and actually land before they can get out and fight you, and this is a game even older than Half-Life 2. It serves to further integrate the way that the backdrop interacts with the player and adds to that feeling of you actually being part of it instead of looking at it. I also just love the touch of having massive, unrecognizable planets looming overhead for the same exact reason. I think the lesson for me here is simply that sometimes less is more. I really try to avoid being the old man yelling at clouds, or in this case, yelling at the skybox, but I think there's a real truth to how technical limitations breed creativity. There is nothing wrong with open world games, but as someone who has messed around with the Unreal Engine, I've worked with some of these tools that developers can use, and you can genuinely generate open world terrain with the click and drag of a brush, throw in any standard skybox with clouds, and run around in it immediately. Now, am I saying that this is what every developer does? Of course not, because making those tools faster and easier to use does let the right developer spend more time on the creativity part. But sometimes it does lead to these titles having similar feeling. In the same way that you can often sense when a game is made on the same engine just because you recognize the feeling of it. Before these more advanced tools existed and world spaces were way more limited in scope, developers had no choice but to find creative ways to represent that scale. And so many of my favorite and most memorable world spaces have been born out of those limits. An excellent modern comparison for this are the two Star Wars games that have come out recently, Outlaws and Jedi Survivor. I think now you're informed enough to predict the point I'm going to make in these clips without needing the whole explanation. Outlaws is perfectly fine looking, but just observe how dull these backgrounds feel in comparison to the expansive and full of life ones found in Jedi Survivor. So, ultimately, what is the takeaway I want to leave you with? Despite what I've talked about, it's not supposed to be nostalgia bait about how design used to be better, nor about how skyboxes of open world games are inferior, or that any one thing is better than the other. All I want is that when you're playing games going forward, take a minute to slow down and really observe your surroundings. Like I had said, when you're running through a world, you're subconsciously absorbing the tone and feelings the developers wanted to elicit through the design. But pay closer attention now to where it's coming from. Look into the background and into the sky, and just get a good look at the art around you that's been painstakingly created and oftentimes overlooked. You'll be surprised at what you might notice. Most of the examples I've mentioned in this video are ones that I've personally found memorable and stand out to me, but I would like to hear in the comments if you have any favorite skyboxes or world spaces that are memorable to you. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.